Hello, protocols, packets, and programs. It's a new year and a new vision for AppSec. Let's set ablaze all the AppSec cliches. No more shifting, no more lists, no more top 10s in our midst. No more chasing CVEs, no more leaking secret keys. Let's talk about a real solution and leave behind this noise pollution. Which means this week we chat with Sandy Carielli about bots and their behavior and driving different types of fraud. In the news segment, Vulns throw a wrench into a wrench. Other Vulns drench Atlassian. Vulns send GitLab back to the bench. Top 10 web hacking techniques of 2023, and more. Make a resolution and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show to learn the latest tools and techniques to understand DevOps, applications, and the cloud. Your trusted source for the latest AppSec news. It's time for Application Security Weekly.
Created in 2005 and hosted by security industry veterans, Paul Security Weekly is your source for in-depth coverage of the latest vulnerabilities, exploits, and security research. Our weekly security news discussion dives deep into the security issues we face today and potential solutions in a fun and lively atmosphere. Each week, we bring on guests from the security community to learn about their journey and discuss topics relevant to their work and research. You can also subscribe to our show by visiting securityweekly.com/subscribe or look for Paul Security Weekly in your favorite podcast catcher. We've recorded a ton of content over the years, so we created Spotify playlists featuring some of our favorite episodes, including interviews with Marcus Random, John McAfee, and Chris Roberts, to name a few. You can find them at securityweekly.com/starter packs.
This is episode 270, recorded January 22nd, 2024. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and I'm here with John Kinsella. Hello, John.
Hey, I think I need a t-shirt that says, let's talk about a real solution that leaves behind this noise pollution. And then I'm going to walk through all the security conferences with that.
That would be amazing. I also want to figure out how to, it sounds like we need, it's sort of Ramones was on my mind there, as I feel like they could turn that into something pretty good. One of those conferences is RSA. That's coming up, and in collaboration, what's the word, with RSA, I have an announcement that cyber threats are evolving. Is your organization keeping up? The 2023 Cybersecurity Year in Review is here. Uncover the latest challenges and strategic responses in CRA's 2023 Cybersecurity Year in Review, sponsored by RSA Conference. There it is. From the impact of generative AI to the risks of ransomware to navigating new SEC rulings, get ahead for 2024 with your free copy at securityweekly.com/year-in-review 2023. Sandy is a principal analyst at Forrester, advising security and risk professionals on application security, with a particular emphasis on the collaboration among security and risk, application development, operations, and business teams. Her research covers topics such as proactive security design, security testing in the software delivery lifecycle, protection of applications in production environments, and remediation of hardware and software flaws. Sounds like all the things. Hello, Sandy. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me back, Mike. Good to see you.
It's good to see you back here. I think we last spoke on episode 243 about 6 months or so ago, also talking about APIs and bots. So, Sandy, we've got a little bit of a musical theme developing here, maybe. And you had "Avoid a Bot Waterloo" was one of your recent blog posts, and I'm going to just be humming ABBA in the background while you give us a bit of an introduction about what you've been thinking about lately around bots.
So maybe I should start by giving the context behind that title. And, if you want some background music for this, that's fine. I'm sure we probably can't license it, though. So it came up because at the Eurovision competition last year, as the host countries were selling tickets to attend, bots were going in and they were buying up the inventory and then reselling them at a profit. And this is something that we've seen over and over and over again. You go back in time and you used to hear about it mostly with items like sneakers, limited edition sneakers, and you've sort of coined the term sneaker bots. But really, inventory hoarding with bots is applicable to anything where there is high demand and low supply. Anything where there is a real driven customer need and people are having trouble getting their hands on it. So yeah, it might be limited edition sneakers. It might be the PlayStation 5. That was a huge target of bots for several years. And actually the length of time that was a bot target is really interesting. It wasn't just immediately a drop. It continued for a couple of years. It's Taylor Swift tickets. It's tickets to Eurovision. Any of those types of scenarios, but also during the pandemic, toilet paper. When there was a baby formula shortage, I had a researcher tell me that they had discovered baby formula bots. Anything where there is demand, where you can potentially conduct arbitrage and resell it at a profit, bot operators will target that. So even if you don't think that the items that you're selling are necessarily a particularly interesting target for bots today, you really don't know what might happen in the future to make that high demand in a bot target.
And I think expanding on this, the inventory hoarding, I think is kind of you just describing it, that perhaps is, it becomes self-evident or becomes obvious. You know, if you're an e-commerce site, like you say, you at least are selling something. You may not appreciate that right now it's going to be targeted by bots, but that should be part of your threat models, thinking about those scenarios. But you're also looking there's other types of fraud. Now there's credential stuffing, and we talked last week about 23andMe, and now they're blaming the users of that type of thing. Yeah. So that's one type of bot, very well known, but there's also lots of fraud and other things too that's going on with these bots as well. So I wanted to ask you about that, or expand this so we can consider the broader range of our threat models. What scenarios should we be concerned about?
Yeah, it very much depends, as you said, on what your business is. Certainly the most common type of bot fraud is still account fraud, whether that's credential stuffing into account takeover, or whether that is creating a lot of fake accounts for use later. That's certainly the top use case for a lot of my clients. Inventory hoarding is up there, but so is ad fraud and marketing fraud. You know, clicking on ads in order to potentially make money off of them, and then your target suddenly has a bunch of leads that are meaningless. That's a common attack. So that's one. The other one that I think is really interesting, particularly in the context of the year 2024 and the election and politics and opinions, is influence fraud. This is the one that I think folks don't always think about, where the idea that bots could drive the perception of preference becomes an interesting issue. So I think, for example, imagine you're logging into your favorite streaming service and you see recommendations of different shows or movies or whatever that you want to watch. You tend to assume that those are based on actual popularity. And in a lot of cases they are. But imagine if there are bots logging in and regularly preferring or playing those shows, and suddenly you're being recommended something based not on actual popularity, but based on a large number of bots that are viewing that show. Now, the reason that they would do that is to have the result that you're just talking about, where suddenly regular users, human users, see this and think, oh, this is popular, I should check it out. And so it ends up creating this appearance of popularity that then may become the reality of popularity, but it's not actually based on unreal preferences at the beginning. And I think that's a really interesting use case. And now apply that to people that are taking polls online, or people that are submitting feedback, or people that are posting reviews to websites. If bots are predominant in any particular area, your perception as an outside user as to what is real is going to be really shifted. And that can get kind of nasty.
You can think it's been caused by, you've got at least two parties going on. Well, three parties, but two for right now. Some sort of developer or team of developers has put this thing together that is, they thought it'd be cool to gather votes online, or, be able to let people watch videos, and then, hey, maybe we want to be able to have some stats around those videos. And then you've got, usually, I think in most of those ones you just described, there is another party, which probably, those two probably weren't talking initially, that says, hey, if we're gathering these metrics around this video, we could start making recommendations around which one most people are watching, or, hey, once we start gathering these votes, then what are we going to do with it? So I think it sounds like at least a part of that is those two parties aren't talking together, or if they are, they're most definitely not thinking through your next point of how do we prevent the monkeys coming with 1,000 keyboards, 1 million keyboards, and actually doing something with that. Yeah.
the how can it be abused. You make a really good point here, John. One of the things that has been an ongoing refrain in the bot world is the need for these very separate constituencies, different set of stakeholders to break out of their silos and work together. And this could mean the security team, the digital team, which might be, to your point, the ones that are looking at the stats and providing recommendations. It could be development. It could be the marketing team. It could be the e-commerce team. But are those different stakeholders all on the same page in terms of the bot threat, one, and in terms of how they view the bot threat and what they think is the real risk to them? That's one of the interesting pieces of this, because you can imagine you are a digital or a marketing team and you're seeing a lot of clicks. Your first instinct may very well be, great, wonderful, success. You don't necessarily want to be told that 50% of those clicks are from non-human people. Well, non-human people are from non-human devices, but those are from bots. Non-human people is kind of an interesting idea. We've got zombies now, which we can talk about that at some point. But yeah, if it turns out that half of your clicks aren't real, for example, do you want to be the one to break the news to your boss? Do you want to actually accept that that's a thing? So there's a very delicate conversation that sometimes has to happen about, hey, there is an advantage to blocking these bots so that you have better data, so that you can serve your actual customers better, so that you can get better results, so that you can get better throughput. But that's not always an easy conversation, because my first instinct, if I hear that, might be, are you telling me that my data is bad? Are you telling me that I'm not getting as much traffic as you think I am? There's some
in some
challenges
cases,
there.
those people that are doing that reporting to their boss or, to their VC or their investors, they might be perfectly happy with those numbers they think someone's doing them a favor in a way, right? So that's, again, and they probably weren't doing this initially. I'm thinking of a specific case with stars on GitHub, and I'll leave it at that. But there's folks out there that are like, hey, you're helping me. There's a difficult conversation we should be having. But then I think also you run into a little bit of, and it probably goes across, leave the GitHub part out of it, but like the videos or probably the sneakers even, of like, hey, everyone's doing it. And then, okay, well, if everyone's doing it, do we really need to see the real numbers, Sandy? Or is it okay if we have like 100,000 sneaker people?
Point counterpoint, yes. So I will throw out two reasons why you might care about the real numbers. On the marketing side, maybe you get a lot of clicks, as you said, and you think you've got a lot of human customers that are interested, but then when you actually go to follow up on those leads, you're wasting a lot of time reaching out to these folks that don't exist. And suddenly your inside sales folks are showing much lower results and much lower returns, because it turns out that only a handful of the folks that actually clicked on your ad campaign are real. So there's that element where, yeah, maybe it looks successful at first, but in the follow-up, it's actually not. Then when you go to the inventory hoarding use case, let's go back to sneakers. Okay, maybe you sell out of all your sneakers really quickly, and you sell those out to bots, and that sounds great. But you're only selling the sneakers. You're not selling any athletic apparel. You're not selling additional shoes. You're not selling T-shirts. You're not selling hoodies. You're not selling anything else that the store might be offering. So you're not getting any of that additional sales volume on top of it. And those folks aren't going to come back and buy more of that stuff. And in the meantime, your human customers who are now frustrated as all get out, and they're going to third-party resale sites maybe to get their hands on the sneakers, but they're also not coming back and buying any of the other items, and they may not come back to your store at all. So long-term, what's the impact on your revenue? And yes, that's a really delicate conversation to have, but those are the types of things you have to think about. Now, I'm going to throw an exception at you, because there is one use case where the incentives are a little bit different, and that's Ticketmaster. And the reason that's a little bit different is that there aren't really any peripherals that you buy with a concert ticket. If you go to a Taylor Swift concert, you're buying the tickets. You're not necessarily buying anything else through that site. And if you're a bot and you're reselling, where are you reselling that ticket through?
Ticketmaster, exactly.
Same site. Yeah. So that one is a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, and I was going to add too. There's also in this incentives, perverse incentives. There's also Spotify, for example, has there's some articles. I can't remember the specific where it was first published. I'll have to throw that in the show notes. But talking about is essentially like money laundering. So here is basically garbage tracks, or just tracks that are randomly generated, but bots driving up listenership to make money off of it. And I think that ties into some of the, where are the incentives? Because Spotify may benefit regardless of, subjective quality of the track, but meaning that there is a legitimate artist behind this who's trying to gather a listenership versus just someone who's just trying to get plays to collect money. And it's polluting, to use maybe the term of the day, that aspect as well. So we get into the sense of who cares about this. And I want to tie this now, Sandy, to also take this conversation of who cares onto the developers too, in the sense of who's also responsible for fixing it. How even do we address this problem? Is it the digital team? Is it developers? Is it, what can we do about this?
There are a few limited things you can do from the developer standpoint. A lot of it ends up being tools you can deploy in production. And the reason I say that is because you think of the actions that you are enabling. Login. That's what credential stuffing is. It's multiple logins. You don't want to block login. Login needs to be a thing you do. Purchasing an item. Well, you want to be able to buy stuff online or you're not going to be able to do business. Being able to put ads out there. Most folks want to advertise. So those actual actions aren't something that the developer would want to stop. Now, the developer could, put in place certain functions that might make it a little bit more difficult. In the case of credential stuffing, one of the biggest disruptors for the bot market is the move to passwordless authentication. A lot of credential stuffing is due to stolen username password combos. If you're adding multi-factor, if you're moving to passwordless, that becomes a lot harder. So as a dev team, if you're adding in those controls, yes, there is something you can do. From the standpoint of inventory hoarding, there are certainly some waiting room types of functionalities that you can add, and that might help reduce some of the bot traffic. But keep in mind, a lot of bot operators also create these longer-term bot accounts that are meant to replicate a human customer over a long period, and they may get into the waiting room too. So it isn't a perfect solution, but it's attempting to cull some of the bad bots. I think ultimately, yeah.
Because where you're going with this, what it sounds like is that these are not necessarily solved problems, but these are to be solved by focused vendors. And typically one of my methods of questioning is always try to pull back, well, what can a developer do? What can an AppSec team do rather than spend money? But it almost sounds like this is one of those exceptions that, is this just the cost of doing business on the internet that nobody out there really should be building their own anti-bot service. Please don't go reinvent CAPTCHAs, of course. But, there's vendors that solve this. And this is one of those things, buy the vendor instead.
I hate to say you need a tool for the same reason that you're hating to say it, because there are so many tools out there. And yet what we find is that, with the exception, I know of a couple of large organizations that have built up their own sort of internal bot solutions. Like Shopify, I think, has their own proprietary solution. But most of the other organizations out there do use a bot vendor. And one of the challenges here is that you really do need a vendor that's keeping up with the bots. Bots range from your really simplistic ones that are very easily blocked by your basic protections, often by your basic WAF, all the way up through much more sophisticated bots that are often owned by bot operators, perhaps offered as bot services, so made available to regular people who can buy into them. And those bot operators are constantly learning from the latest defenses, constantly trying to get around the latest defenses, constantly trying to improve and get smarter. This is not an area where you can stand pat. So unless you have a very sophisticated threat research team in your organization that's going to keep up with this and build something internally and have that level of ongoing research and ongoing improvement, you're probably going to be outsourcing this to a vendor.
Along those same lines, it's been about 20 years since we've had Terminator 3: Rise of the Machines. In 2024, are we just going to see bots being inevitable, and even perhaps personal bots? Meaning, I write a bot, John has one, you have one, and we embrace generative AI to go out and do our competitive Taylor Swift ticket purchasing. And this is just what users are embracing themselves.
This is a multi-part answer, so give me a second.
I love asking multi-part questions, so go ahead.
One, bot traffic is already pervasive.
Sure.
That's already there. Bot traffic, if you combine both good bot and bad bot traffic, we're approaching about half of internet traffic overall. Something in the mid to upper 40s is often the number that I see. So we already see the rise of the bots. Now, the question of whether you or John or I can build our own, for the most part, what would be available for us to build or use via generative AI is going to be fairly simplistic. If you go into ChatGPT and say, I'd like to build a bot that can buy a Taylor Swift ticket, they could probably build you something, but it's going to be very basic. It's going to be pretty straightforward. It's something that's probably going to be blocked by your pretty basic bot management software. It's not going to get through all of the defenses, both because it's not going to have access to the level of sophistication needed, and because, keep in mind, in the case of ChatGPT, what's the latest data that's been fed into it? 2021, 2022? Bots have evolved quite a bit since then, so have defenses. Anything that you're building based on data that old is going to be pretty easy to block. So you and I can't necessarily go and say, let's go build a bot. Here's what we can do. As I said, there are a lot of bot operators out there. Bots as a service is very much a thing. Credential stuffing as a service is very much a thing. And what we found actually is that last year, 17% of US adults used a bot service in some capacity to purchase an item that they couldn't get otherwise. So what we're seeing is a little bit of a, if we can't beat them, join them, where frustrated customers are now buying into these more sophisticated bot services that are being run by folks in, let's say, ethically gray areas. It's not necessarily illegal, but it's not awesome. And they're buying into these bot services. They're paying a premium for the bot to buy the thing that they can't get themselves. So that is happening. We're not building it, but we're
one of the
definitely
ones you
buying
reminded me of, and we're right on the edge here of, and I'm giving this as an example of something which is, really gray or really almost white. eBay. So there's a lot of bots on there which will pop up in the last 30 seconds of an auction, start bidding heavily.
Oh,
There's apps that you can get for the phone which will, I'm sure they're on computers too, or maybe even clouds of bots. But like saying you're interested in something, don't put a bid in as a human until the last 30 seconds because you're going to be battling those bots. And the bots will, if you put a bid in, they'll see the price go up. And so it actually is advantageous to not put your bid in until the end. And right, I've got friends who've used them. I know I've tried them in the past. Is it illegal? Is it unethical? Is it, it comes back to what I was saying about, when eBay designed the system, were they expecting bots to come in and start bidding up and doing this type of thing? It's tricky.
it is. And look, they probably weren't. We probably didn't think that far ahead. In most environments, it's not strictly illegal, but you start to create this issue where, one, regular folks who aren't as technically adept aren't able to get what they want online. And two, you have to wonder how those profits are being spent from the bot operators. What else are they using them for? In some cases, it may just be they're just using this as a selling mechanism, but that's not true of everyone. And we've certainly seen takedowns of large, we'll call them, attack groups that have been primarily based on bots and have used that money in other criminal activities. So it's not always criminal, but sometimes the profits do feed other criminal aspects. And if it's account fraud and account takeover, then that's obviously criminal.
Yeah, I'll expand on that because especially the ethical and these gray areas too, because if we talk about ad fraud, influence fraud as well. With ad fraud, there could, you also have the potential of ad brokers driving synthetic traffic for ad impressions just to demonstrate, oh, this is how much you got to pay us because this is how many clicks, this is how many people saw this particular ad, setting aside or perhaps glossing over that this is the difference between these human people, as we said, versus these actual bots here that have no bearing and you shouldn't be paying for in the first place. So there's definitely, even just beyond the inventory hoarding, a lot of potential perverse incentives. There's a lot of capturing of the market where ad brokers, for example, can control a lot of this information. And perhaps that information aspect is what's really hard to do, to figure out what is bot traffic, as well as identifying, that CAPTCHA, that proof of work, et cetera, for figuring out this is a human that you're actually interacting with.
I think that's absolutely right. And what we're seeing with the bot management market is that all of the top vendors have very deep threat research teams that are really going in and trying to figure out, what does a bot look like today? And what are the bot operators going after? And how do we need to hone our defenses? And what do we need to try to take down in order to stymie this group? There is it's very much an ongoing research type of industry. Threat research and threat intelligence is huge in the space, and continually increasing the detections and looking at different signals that tell you, is this a bot or is this not a bot? That's the challenge in here. This isn't a set it and forget it.
I wonder, thinking of these challenges, thinking of the future, and going back to the idea of generative AI or personal bots and ethical gray areas. I don't think DEF CON has a bot village, but if we posit a bot village to exist in DEF CON, what are some things you might imagine or would like to even see be part of that? What are the discussions or technical topics or things that might drive that type of DEF CON style approach to this?
Oh man, that would be fun. I would expand it beyond necessarily bots. It could be a broader bot fraud village or a broader fraud village. But if we're looking at the bot elements, I would think about trends in the bot operators. What are the sites that they're going after now? What are the targets? What are the types of bot attacks? Is credential stuffing and account takeover still the top use case? How much is ad fraud increasing in interest? Where are we seeing inventory hoarding most? Where are we seeing risks of influence fraud? Where are we seeing card fraud? All of those types of issues. And then maybe look at how some of these are aligning with, I would say, adjacent fraud. So maybe, where does payment fraud come into play? Where does identity fraud that's not based on bots come into play? How do those fit together? And start to really map out, what is the territory of bots and adjacent fraud, and how does that all look?
One of the things that now I've mentioned CAPTCHAs, and you haven't brought them up, thankfully, as even a potential solution here. So we'd love to hear those opinions, especially to talking off air, as I want to bring this in. Not everybody perhaps feels the same way about CAPTCHAs as I do, or as we do. And there's an interesting psychology going on here. Tell us more about this.
Yeah, I will say at the top, this really surprised me when I first did the research. So we asked, again, U.S. adults about their opinions on CAPTCHAs. And, you're not surprised to hear that about half of our respondents say, we are frustrated when we see a CAPTCHA. Yeah, that's you, that's me, that's probably most of our listeners here. We see a CAPTCHA and we're like, oh God, we have to deal with this now. But about half of the respondents said, I feel safer when I see a CAPTCHA. And that was a little bit unintuitive, but what I guess is happening here is that a CAPTCHA is a visual indicator that something is going on, that something is being checked. Now, if I were a user that wasn't researching this for a living and didn't realize what was being looked for, I might assign greater weight to that CAPTCHA, to that challenge, and assume that it's looking for more than whether I am human or not. So maybe there is among a lot of these users, there is a sense that that challenge adds some additional security weight to the transaction, beyond just checking are you human or not, some assumption that there's more going on that makes them feel as though their work with this site is being checked in some way, is being validated in some way. A little bit like looking at the top of the screen for the little lock. It doesn't mean nearly as much in this day and age because anyone can get an SSL certificate, but people still view that as a visual indicator. And I think sometimes the challenge is looked at in the same way.
The EV SSL, came and went, so that it used to be a little bit of green there in that navigation bar, and green is pretty, and it is kind of meaningless ultimately.
Well, especially once we realized that it was, kind of hard to tell in some cases, and we had a couple of instances of EV search that shouldn't have been issued.
And I think one of the things I just want to tag there is not the idea that this isn't a predicate to blame the user in the sense of, well, there is the lock or there's the lack of the lock. It's that challenge of that UX influence, to use that word, to indicate there is security there or there's something you should be worried about. But what action should I take? I think that was always the problem here, is that, something bad may be going on, and the end user says, okay, so now what, right? And I think that's a little bit feels like, from a developer perspective, there's bad bots out there. So what do I do about it? And that's what I've been struggling with this whole time.
Yeah. And you're right to struggle with it, because from the developer standpoint, there isn't necessarily as much you can do other than what we've already talked about. A lot of this then falls onto the AppSec team and the folks that are running and deploying the application in prod to put the right controls on top and really be detecting what is a bot and deterring those bots and trying to keep them from coming back. And it may be even more complicated than just blocking them. Maybe what you want to do is make them waste their time so that it actually costs them more to attack you and they decide they're going to waste their resources elsewhere. So there are all sorts of interesting psychologies in this. It's kind of a fun area to play in because of that, because you're thinking more about the psychology of the attacker and the psychology of the fraudster than you are in most other areas of AppSec that I deal with. It's much more about fraud and business focus.
I like that, because that feels more where you can actually have more measurable impact, a more meaningful impact for the business from AppSec. And I'll draw a bit of a parallel in the sense of attacker cost for exploits, vulnerabilities. This is why Apple, for example, is building sandboxing, the blast doors around iMessage. Google's doing the same thing with, long time ago, inter-process isolation within Chrome. But Sandy, we're running out of time for our segment here, and John wasn't aware of this, but I wanted to save some time at the end for an a cappella rendition of Waterloo as we send out this segment. But before we do that, and while John warms up his voice, we've been asking all of our guests, rather than AppSec in 3 words, to fill in the blank of AppSec is most likely to. We're building a yearbook this year. Finish this phrase for us, Sandy. AppSec is most likely to what?
AppSec is most likely to remain a common cause of breaches. And it's sad for me to say that, but it has been one of the leading causes of breaches due to external attacks over the past few years, pretty much as long as I have been researching this as Forrester, and I don't see it changing. Sorry, guys.
Well, so I think that means we're going to have you back in 2024 at least once more, and probably in 2025. But I just want to say thank you again. Fortunately, you took up enough time with that response. We'll have to save the acapella to next time you're on. So, John, you're off the hook. But thank you very much, Sandy. This was a fun conversation.
We'll work on it. Thanks very much, guys. Great
Thanks
to see
again,
you.
John. Thanks to all of our listeners. We're going to take a quick break and return with news of the week as I hum Waterloo, Waterloo. Couldn't escape if I wanted to. It's a great song. It's a banger.